Hello and welcome to another screencast where this time I will be discussing membranes in general, kind of their function. We'll talk about the structure of them in another screencast. So by the end of this one, we're just going to be dealing with number two here. So just looking at being able to describe and explain the role of membranes in general, and then just a little bit of comparison of membranes in prokaryotes versus eukaryotes there, and we'll deal with number three in another screencast. So, cells, basic unit of structure and function of organisms. So we're down here, sort of at this level, and regardless of whether we're looking at eukaryotic cells here, or prokaryotic cells, or even just organelles of these eukaryotic cells, we're going to see membranes come into play. Even in some viruses, we'll see membranes, even though they are not technically classified as cells. So membranes seem to be something that all living things have in common. So let's talk about those membranes again. So again, here we see an example of the influenza virus. And again, virus, not a cell, but there is this membranous envelope that is a phospholipid bilayer, right? So there is a component to that, and you see that there are these glycoproteins studding the membrane there. So we see them in viruses. Here we have the plasma membrane or the cell membrane in bacteria, right, or prokaryotes, right? And then, of course, in eukaryotic cells, like the plant cell that we see down here, we have the plasma membrane, right, the cell membrane inside of the cell wall. And so here's this plasma membrane identified there inside the cell wall. But then all of these organelles inside here, right? The nucleus is a membrane-bound organelle. This endoplasmic reticulum is a membrane-bound organelle. This Golgi apparatus, this mitochondrion, right? The chloroplast. These are all examples of organelles inside of eukaryotic cells that have membranes, right? So, and we can stain these things, right? We see a eukaryotic cell here, so we see the outline of that membrane. Here's the outline of where the nucleus would be in that eukaryotic cell. And all of these darker guys here are prokaryotes that are stained. And so these membranes, we see them, and they are important, right? So at their most basic function, membranes separate. So there's kind of two things the way I think about this, right? One is that membranes separate fluids, more about that in a second, and then they provide a surface area for exchange and reactions to occur. So this separation, but then it's also a location of where you're going to be exchanging molecules, exchanging nutrients, gases, wastes, and then even some enzymatic reactions are happening there, as well as identifications, cell signaling, things like that. So we see that this separation here, there's basically two kinds of membranes involved here. We have this plasma membrane, which is separating the outside of the cell from the inside of the cell, the cytoplasm. And then if you are a eukaryotic cell, you have these organelles, and those organelle membranes are separating the cytoplasm from the organelle lumen, or the inside of the organelle itself, right? So if we think of this, right, then eukaryotes are sort of membranes within inside of membranes within inside of membranes, right, if you keep looking at their structure. So the internal membranes are facilitating cell processes. For example, the mitochondria here are helping to facilitate cellular respiration, at least aerobic cellular respiration, where oxygen and organics are converted into ATP, right, and CO2. Right? So this, and we'll see in there's a whole chapter dealing with this aerobic cell respiration, but these membranes here are places that are separating the inside and outside of the cytoplasm, as well as then inside of the mitochondrion itself. We have little spaces inside the mitochondrion that are separated from other spaces inside the mitochondrion, and the reactions that are going on here differ in the reactions that are going on there. In fact, the membranes play a vital role in keeping those two fluids separated and transporting things across them. Right? we'll see similar reactions happening in chloroplasts down here where photosynthesis is occurring. So again, this is where we're going here in a little bit, in a few chapters, looking at these membrane-bound organelles and the processes that are going on there. We've already talked a little bit about gene expression and the endoplasmic reticulum, and the Golgi apparatus are other membrane-bound organelles, and many of the reactions that are happening to modify proteins are happening inside the lumen of this ER, and then are being those proteins are then being transferred to another apparatus, the Golgi apparatus there. So we see that the membranes here, especially on the rough ER, these are ribosomes on the rough ER there, and those ribosomes are attached to that membrane, providing a surface area for reactions to occur, namely the translation of mRNAs into an amino acid sequence, right, or a polypeptide. Now you're thinking, okay, well, wait a second. I thought you said that the prokaryotes don't have these things, and they don't. Prokaryotes do not have that, yet they still will carry out many of these same processes. And the prokaryotes accomplish this oftentimes by an infolding of their plasma or cell membrane to create that surface area where the reactions are going to occur. So that's what you see in these electron micrographs here, is that there's this double phospholipid bilayer here. And then all of this, right, all of this structure here is one big infolding. So if I was to sketch it, right, this would be just the membrane. And what happens is you infold that membrane like this, right, back and forth. Right, and this creates an increased surface area for reactions to be occurring. And again, this membrane is separating the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell. So many of these prokaryotes are doing what eukaryotes are doing across their organelle membranes. They're doing it, the prokaryotes are doing it just across their cell membrane. Right? So we see that for respiratory stuff, respiratory mechanisms, as well as photosynthetic mechanisms, as well as gene expression mechanisms. Right? So these membranes are critically important to many life processes. So hopefully you should be able to just talk a little bit about the role of membranes in general here, and then do a little quick comparison of the membranes between eukaryotes and prokaryotes. There are some other differences as well in those things, but that's a little bit more detail for another time. Okay, thanks for listening, and bring your questions to class.